Welcome to Inmate Tea with AMP. Today we're joined by Vince Carthane, a formerly incarcerated man exposing what he believes is a major legal failure in Florida's prison system. Vince says he was sentenced to 30 years with a virtually blank sentencing score sheet, which Florida law clearly forbids under statute 944.175E. He argues this isn't just a mistake, it's a form of human trafficking that fuels the prison industry. Let's hear Vince's story and why this fight for justice matters for everyone. Welcome, Vince.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
We're glad to have you.
Yeah.
So, Vince, get us started with a little bit of backstory about your incarceration time.
Okay, I was sentenced in January of 1991. The judge orally pronounced a 30-year sentence outside the guidelines. The guideline sentence recommended 3 years. I forwarded you a copy of the score sheet. You can show it on the screen.
Okay.
It shows that they could have given me anything between probation up to 4.5 years with a recommended sentence of 3 years. But the judge decided he wanted to go outside the guidelines and pronounced a 30-year sentence. And on the score sheet where it says reasons for departure, nothing is there. Went to trial, but someone checked the box marked plea, which is fraud. And fraud is an element of human trafficking. The score sheet where it says date of sentence, nothing is there. Where it's stamped, filed in court, there's nothing written there, and there's no judge's signature on the document. And lack of official documentation is also an element of human trafficking. But I didn't know these things back then. When I was first taken from the county jail to the prison system, the classification officer looking over my paperwork, I've never forgotten this because it's unusual that you would hear something like this. He looked around nervously and said, "Don't tell anybody I told you this, but you're not supposed to be in here." And it took me many, many years to figure out what he was talking about. He knew what was going on, and he stayed silent about it.
Oh.
So Vince, when you first got to the Florida Department of Corrections and this man told you you didn't supposed to be in here under the virtue of the supposedly sentence that you were to serve, he didn't do his due diligence and notify the administration that your score sheet wasn't properly filled out. Now, this for one is a breakdown in justice, and it served you an injustice. And I understand now where you're saying that you were pretty much kidnapped, and this is a form of human trafficking because you were held against your will. This is false imprisonment at its best because there is no actual judgment and commitment because there was no actual worksheet that says, hey, this man is in the state of Florida's custody under the virtue of a judgment, because the worksheet, by the judge not signing it, by there not being the proper elements filled out on the worksheet, you are pretty much now falsely imprisoned and you are being held against your will. So now you're being kidnapped. And anytime they move you from one facility to the next facility, they're trafficking you as an illegal because they obtain authority over your body, and they're saying you're a ward of the state and that you are now property of the state. So they kidnap you and they're transporting you all over the state of Florida, and that's where the human trafficking comes into play. Because if under the law, if you take a person and move them within 5 feet of where they were originally at, that's considered kidnapping. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, they've done this to many other people, not just myself.
That's what I was going to ask you, Vince. When you were incarcerated, did you notice other people were having the same issue?
Well, the Florida court system, if you look back around like 1989, 90, 91, even the Florida Supreme Court flip-flopped many times on whether or not it was okay for a court to send somebody to prison without what they call contemporaneous written reasons for departure sentencing. See, they were making their decisions without regard to the statute about what the the responsibilities were of the prison officials. The statute tells prison officials do not accept. It's a simple thing. Just send that person back and tell the court to fill out the paperwork properly and then send them back. But they were ignoring that statute because they wanted to make money. The more people you get in prison, you increase the prison capacity and they increase their money and they increase their number of people that they can put to work, forced to work for nothing. Slavery is legal in prison if you're in prison legally. But if you're not in there legally, then that's human trafficking.
I wonder if this still goes on today. I wonder if people that are in prison in Florida are still having this issue with their scorecard not being completed. Did you have any contacts that are from prison that you're still in contact with that can tell you whether or not it's still happening?
I knew of one other guy that tried to get justice on that statute, but both of us, they never reached the merits of that statute. They always made excuses to have a procedural errors to keep from reaching the merits of the statute. They would never rule on whether or not the statute what effect it would have. But the language is clear on it. Do not accept.
Yeah.
And that statute is backed up by the 6th Amendment saying we have a right to be notified of the charges against us. Now, when you're going outside the guidelines, you have to have aggravated factors, at least allege some aggravating factors. And when you leave nothing there, I'm not aware of those charges against me. So it is a constitutional issue. Although the Florida courts was like, whether or not there's reasons for departure sentencing, it's not a constitutional issue. I have to strongly disagree with that. Even though I'm not a lawyer, but just from a layman's standpoint, everybody admits that there's corruption in courts and prison systems, but they need to be questioned publicly about these things. I also had sent you a letter from when I was in prison. I had a pen pal write, and the guy that was secretary with the Department of Corrections wrote her back. And it's in writing, and he told her, that statute refers to inmates on work release. It doesn't pertain to him. And he also says, he knows all of the rules, and he can take this up with the courts. He's filed hundreds of grievances, but then the courts turned around and said, you haven't exhausted your administrative grievances. But yet they admitted that I filed hundreds of grievances.
Wow.
Isn't that the games that they play? If you're going to tell lies, you shouldn't do it on paper. You shouldn't do it on paper because that documentation is forever. And in Florida, the issue of human trafficking does not have a criminal statute of limitations. So even though I was locked up from 1990 to 2008, it's still very relevant. But they don't want to deal, with people not wanting to deal with this.
But there's no secret, Vince. I've studied cases from Florida where you're not the only one that the score sheet was improperly filled out, that they didn't fill it out as General Statute, Florida General Statute 921.0014 states. Now, this guideline states, it says sentencing guideline worksheet computation and score sheet. A single guideline score sheet shall be prepared for each defendant unless the defendant has more than one felony that was committed under more than one version or revision of the guideline. The separate score sheet. The score sheet must cover all the defendant's offenses pending before the sentencing court. And this is the kicker. Either the state attorney's office or the Department of Corrections, for both, shall prepare the score sheet. The score sheet must be presented to the state attorney and the defense counsel for review for accuracy in all cases unless the judge directs otherwise. The defendant's score sheet must be approved and signed by the sentencing judge. So, Vince, when you got the prison and your sentencing judge had not signed your score sheet, the DA, the state attorney, had not signed your score sheet. Attorney that represented you had not signed your score sheet. This shows a breakdown in the court system. This shows their willingness to false imprison you, to get free labor out of you, to make you a slave, an indentured servant. They showed their willingness. They all work together in a conundrum to deprive you of your rights. And this is a breakdown in the judicial system that violated your 14th Amendment to due process. You didn't receive due process. You didn't receive the 6th Amendment right, the protection of the courts. You didn't receive your 5th Amendment right to be properly sentenced and imprisoned under the virtue of a sentence, because they deprived you of the proper procedure. And people may say, like, well, if he violated, people may say, like, right now, if he violated the crime, who cares? If he committed the crime, who cares if he got proper procedure? Well, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you this. If you don't receive proper procedure, now you're at the mercy of somebody that holds you and decides your fate. And when they're deciding your fate, they've got their fingerprints on your life. And they're dictating everything that you do in this life. And now it becomes past being punished for the crime that you committed. It becomes, as Vince has told us, slavery, kidnapping. Imagine being kidnapped and stripped of all your liberties, placed in a cell and fed whatever they decide to feed you, allowing you to shower whenever they decide to allow you to shower, allowing you to use the restroom whenever they allow you to use the restroom, being in a cell with feces in the corners, rats and rodents running around in your cell. You know, these are the type of things that you're subjected to, and you have no way to get out of it, and you are not in control. Because when your sentence is up, they still got you in prison because you don't have no release date, because this piece of paper was not properly filled out. So the system failed Vince. That's what Vince is trying to convey to us today. The system failed him. They fought imprisonment.
It'd be a lot easier for people to understand from the standpoint of a check. If you don't fill out the amount of the check, which is like a sentence, if you don't sign it, if the bank turn around and cash that blank check, unsigned and undated check, fraud has been committed. Fraud is the same element in human trafficking.
Yeah.
Okay, so they got away with cashing a blank check. But the thing is, it's all documented, and it take a lot of nerve to commit crimes that are documented. Because it's a paper trail that's forever.
Yeah.
It just never ceases to amaze me how I've asked private investigators, investigative reporters at news stations and newspapers. Everybody makes an excuse. I've contacted hundreds of lawyers. All the lawyers say, oh, that's a practice of law that I don't specialize in. Everybody has an excuse. I had two attorneys. One of them admitted in an email that I was a victim of human trafficking. And another one said in the email that this was esoteric knowledge that not very many people knew about, but he wouldn't represent. So, there are people that know, or have figured out what's going on, but they just, I guess they're trying to protect their, their license that comes from the state. That's why I've also contacted lawyers outside the state that wouldn't have their license affected by the Florida Bar Association, but then they make the excuse of, oh, I'm not licensed in Florida, or you need to contact somebody in Florida. It's just caught in a pickle.
Yeah.
You could contact the international lawyer, somebody that practices international law, that practices, in the air, water, land. Don't matter what law it is, they practice. And international law, that trumps everything. Somebody, like the United Nations.
I have contacted.
Yeah, somebody.
Oh, you've done that too.
And what did they tell you?
And I've turned over every stone you can imagine. I've even contacted Doge, Florida Doge, and they wrote me back. And at first, this is a matter for somebody else, and then they wrote back again and said, oh, you're right. This is something that can fall under our jurisdiction, and we'll get back with you. But they never did.
And there again, they see it, but nobody's wanting to call them on it, because this is an issue that can blow the lid of Florida slam off.
Well, I know it.
And
bigger than Watergate. It's bigger than Watergate.
Yeah.
It would
What's
totally
it?
embarrass the state of Florida. It's only been like the last 2 years when I discovered the situation fit the description of human trafficking. I
Yeah.
only picked this fight up about 2 years ago.
Mm.
I got to researching human trafficking and what fits the description of it. I was like, man, that's what I went through.
But still, for you
But
to
still,
be fighting it now, even though you're not incarcerated, you're out here in the free world, for you to still be picking up that fight, that shows us, it shows our viewers, look, something is major wrong here. You have been wronged. So many people in Florida have been wronged by the same thing and could be being wronged by it today. And somebody's got to stand up and fight against it. And I'm so glad that you are. I'm so glad that you've come on this podcast to get your story out. I hope that anybody listening to this episode, listening to your story, if they have some way to fight this, to help you, I wish that they would reach out and join this fight with you.
I appreciate it. I've even reached out to the FBI. They gave me a file number on this issue. They never did get back with me. And they said, oh, we've got more important things to look into right now. I've contacted the EEOC because they also deal with human trafficking in a certain aspect.
It looks like you covered all the bases. I just hope that somebody listening can relate to what you're going through, and maybe they're looking at it and they're like, hey, that happened to me. You know, what about like maybe a class action lawsuit if you get enough people from Florida that have experienced the same thing? Is that something that you've, explored?
That might have some potential.
Vince, if you could bust this wide open, you're going to bring some awareness to people's cases that probably would have never been looked at otherwise. This could be monumental, not only for the state of Florida, but just the United States in general, because this is challenging jurisdiction. Because without these documents, without proper documentation, without this stuff being properly documented, they have no jurisdiction to hold you under the virtue of a judgment. And therefore, the lack of jurisdiction anywhere, I don't care where you are, the lack of jurisdiction anywhere to hold anybody under the virtue of a judgment and sentence is kidnapping. It is human trafficking.
I call it enslavement disguised as lawful imprisonment.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Vince, we hope that this really brings the light to your cause and shines a major light on an issue that's probably playing out throughout the country. And we know that it played out in Florida in the 90s, in the 2000s, and on up into 2001, 2002, where I found documentation of it. I'm hoping that it does make a spark and somebody contacts you and gets in touch with you or contacts us and asks us how to get in contact with you where, y'all can move forward.
Yeah. And to our viewers, I do want to say, if you have been or are incarcerated in Florida and you have experienced what Vince is talking about today, a blank sentencing score sheet, please think about reaching out to Vince. We're going to have his contact email in the description below this video. Please reach out to him if you have experienced this, or if you're somebody that knows what next steps he might need to take or can help him in some kind of way. Please reach out to Vince. That wraps up today's episode of Inmate Tea with AMP. A huge thank you to Vince for sharing his story and shining a light on the serious implications of incomplete sentencing documents and the potential misuse of the justice system. What we heard today raises urgent questions about transparency, legality, and whether the prison system is operating as it should, or is it operating for profit at the expense of justice. We'll continue to follow Vince's issue closely and see, where this goes, because every person has the right to know the truth about their sentence and to have the law applied fairly. Until next time, this is Inmate Tea with AMP, where we fight to make sure justice is more than just a word.